Autistic regression. Can you suddenly become more autistic? This phenomenon of a seeming loss of capability or significantly increased sensitivity is actually much more common than you might think, especially post-diagnosis. You could do it before, why can't you do it now? Have you stopped trying? Are you just using autism as an excuse now? It's actually neither of these two things, yet this phenomenon can be initially baffling, confusing, frustrating to individuals, partners, and family members. In this video, we'll look at autistic regression when a person's capacity seems to diminish over time, as well as what you can do about it. Hi everyone, Paul Micallef here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. So first off, surprisingly, this type of perceived autistic regression experience is actually surprisingly common. From the outside, it can look like a person is getting more autistic over time, often over quite a short period, especially following a diagnosis or self-discovery. So what's that about? Today, we'll mostly be looking at two important factors, namely the effect of masking and burnout. There may well be much more to the story than this, but these two factors are extremely common and definitely play a big role in the phenomenon that we're looking at. So the first thing I should probably say as a bit of a caveat is that no one gets more autistic or less autistic. That language is actually highly problematic for a lot of reasons since it misrepresents what it means to be a spectrum. So what we really mean when we say someone looks like they're becoming more autistic, it's that the behavior that we can see on the outside is getting weirder and weirder, sometimes in an interesting way, sometimes in a not so good way, and or the support requirements that a person needs to be able to function seem to be increasing over time. So again, this is all to do with how a person is perceived on the outside. And as usual, today I'll be sharing the other side of that so that we can get a bit more of a sense of what's happening on the inside. So firstly, the burnout phenomenon. The image that comes to mind when I think about this is, have you ever seen athletes at the very end of an ultra marathon? A marathon is 42 kilometers or about 26 miles. And did you know some people run 2 or more back to back? Needless to say, these athletes are good at running. That's a massive understatement. But sometimes at the end of the race, we see them stumbling, delirious with fatigue, barely able to put one foot in front of the other, trying to make it that last couple of 100 meters to the finish line. And when you think about it, this is not surprising. They are really, really struggling at the end of this race. Of course they are. The more surprising fact is that they've got so close to the finish line in the first place. But what if we didn't know what happened and we didn't know how hard it is to run 100 kilometers in a day? We might be tempted to ask silly questions like, what happened? Why is this elite athlete suddenly crawling on all fours, barely making headway in the last couple of meters of this race? Don't tell me they've forgotten how to walk. You're super fit. You know how to run. In fact, you've just already run God knows how many kilometers. So don't pretend that you can't do it now all of a sudden. Unfortunately, for a large number of late identified autistic adults, an autism discovery occurs as a result of a major life crisis. An I can't do this anymore type moment. Autistic burnout comes in many shapes and sizes. It might look like an almighty crash, or it might manifest slowly over time, an ever-increasing fatigue that just doesn't seem to get better. So my first conjecture, one reason that we might see regression-like behavior in conjunction with an autism discovery, is that for many of us, major burnout was just a matter of time when we're trying to fit into a mainstream lifestyle. A little bit like a physical illness that saps the body's strength over time, in burnout, our batteries don't know how to recharge. Or another way to think of it is that for one reason or another, rest and recovery take orders of magnitude longer than we might expect in normal circumstances. That ultra marathon runner might get a really good night's sleep, but I really wouldn't blame them if they needed to take a whole day off to recover from running 100 kilometers in one day. But what if it took 2 days or 3 days or more? What if such extreme exhaustion actually did some serious damage to their body and they need a whole month to recover? If we check in too early in the recovery process, it's easy to ask questions like, why aren't you better yet? And worse, if we consistently interrupt the recovery process, the person may never return to their previous form. For me, this feels like charging my batteries up to 10% and then draining them back to 0, and then charging them up to 10% and then draining them back to 0. I end up living my life on power saving mode because the expectation is that I shouldn't need so much time to recover. Well, there's not much I can do about that. The fact is, I do need more time, and if I don't get the adequate recovery, then I will not have the ability, the energy, the resources to manage daily life effectively. And in addition to that, when I've got so little energy, everything else becomes harder too. Suddenly, daily functioning is a massive chore. Really basic things get dropped or missed. I'm clearly not coping, and it can quickly turn into a downward spiral as I don't even have enough energy for basic self-care. So this can be one factor that leads to a person to seem on the outside to become more autistic, slowly losing capacity over time and needing more and more accommodations just to cope. And as we've seen, it's likely that an episode like this will occur in conjunction with an autism discovery. In fact, in many cases, it's the direct catalyst. The second factor that could lead to what looks like autistic regression is masking, or more specifically, unmasking. It's pretty common to have less energy and to slow down as we get older. Kids run around all day, young adults pack their schedules with a million things, mature adults are more likely to take their foot off the accelerator, and much older adults are often more content at a slower pace. This is not an autistic trait, just a function of our human life cycle. So in a similar way, there are things that I used to do when I was younger that I would absolutely not do now. I used to make the most of free drinks at events and stay out late and crash on the floor at a friend's place overnight. These days, no thanks. I don't want to put myself through that anymore. The same is true for my sensory environment. I used to go to cafes and bars without earplugs. These days, I wouldn't go to the supermarket without earplugs. I've even started wearing these massive over-ear muffs on top of my earplugs when I go for my weekly grocery shop. Am I more autistic now than I used to be? That's a rhetorical question. Obviously, the answer is no. But I certainly look more autistic on the outside. The reality, though, is that I'm just choosing to mask less. Instead of putting up with the noise, I choose not to. Instead of looking you in the eye the whole time, I choose not to. Suddenly, my behavior seems a lot more autistic. I'm stimming and rocking and telling you my communication preferences. Where has all this come from? Well, nowhere. It's always been there. I've just been hiding it, masking it with inconspicuous neurotypical behavior. As I get older and more tired, I'm less likely to put so much energy into masking, less likely to put up with the substandard options I used to accept, and as a result, I look more autistic on the outside. There's another factor here, though, that's also important. When going through a self-discovery, it's common to have a period of exploration. In other words, after masking for decades, the question becomes, who am I without the mask? It's second nature. I've worn it so long. Where does the mask stop and where do I begin? In this situation, it's common for people to do a full pendulum swing, throw off the mask entirely and start experimenting. Let's try earplugs. Let's try fidget toys. Let's try saying no to phone calls. Let's try cutting my hair or changing how I dress. And again, from the outside, the question is like, where is all this coming from? This isn't you. I've known you for years. What's going on? One of my favorite Simpsons quotes is, they've just gone away on vacation, and Lisa says, with all the craziness and confusion of packing, I forgot to pack. Lisa, that's not at all like you. Exactly. So when people say, what's going on? This isn't the you that I know. Well, they're kind of right to a degree. This isn't the masked version of myself that you've been seeing all this time. I'm trying a new version of myself. I know it's a bit of a shock, but it's all part of the unmasking and self-discovery process. So where to from here? So firstly, I hope it's obvious from exploring the factors of burnout and unmasking that there's a kind of transient element here to what looks like autistic regression. We're seeing what looks like a loss of capacity or increased sensitivity, but to a large extent, it's a renormalizing, recalibrating type of exercise. So in that sense, this transition period won't last forever. But that said, after the dust settles, things are not going to go back to how they were before. There will be a new normal, or normal for you at least. One that's hopefully better than what you've been experiencing previously. Think about it. After finally recovering from burnout, why would I want to go straight back into the exact same situation that caused that burnout in the first place? Or after unmasking and redefining my identity, Why would I go back to wearing the mask 24/7 and hiding this new self that I've discovered? So with that in mind, let's take a moment to acknowledge how big the transition can be when you first discover you're autistic. It's huge, and it's likely to be huge for the people around you as well, especially those closest to you. So my last word of advice before we wrap up this topic for today is let's be gentle. Gentle on yourself, gentle with the others in your life walking this journey with you. It would be lovely if they were supportive. Sometimes they are, which is fantastic. But the reality is that it's likely others in your life who are close to you might find the whole situation really challenging, which essentially means they might need to go on an entire journey of their own, and they don't have the head start that you do, which means it might be a while before they catch up. So as always, I encourage you to seek support for yourself, especially within the autistic community and from others who have walked a similar journey before. And if you're a partner or loved one of someone who's just discovered their own autism, your journey is valid too, and the more external support you can find, the better you'll be able to be there for your partner when they need you the most. So let's wrap it up there for today. I hope you found this video valuable. I'm really keen to hear if it resonated for you, so please leave a comment if you can. Have you experienced a drop in your own capacity or an increase in sensitivities, either for a short time or what feels like a permanent change? As always, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next week. Bye.